In a small, unassuming town where life moved at a steady and predictable pace, an unexpected event unfolded one crisp autumn afternoon. The air carried the faint scent of fallen leaves, and the streets were lined with trees painted in shades of orange and gold. It was the kind of day that seemed perfect for reflection or quiet enjoyment. But for two teenagers named Jake and Tyler, it turned into something far more complicated. Jake and Tyler were typical high schoolers, full of energy, often loud, and sometimes reckless. They had known each other since middle school and spent most of their free time together. On this particular day, they were walking home from school, their backpacks slung carelessly over their shoulders. Their conversation was filled with jokes, playful insults, and plans for the weekend. As they passed through the local park, their attention shifted to a man sitting alone on a bench near the edge of the path. The man looked older, probably in his late 50s or early 60s. He wore a faded jacket adorned with military patches, its colors dulled by years of wear. His posture was stooped, but there was a quiet dignity about him. He sat still, staring ahead as if lost in thought. To Jake and Tyler, he seemed out of place in the lively park surrounded by children playing and families chatting. His presence intrigued them, though not in a positive way. "Hey, check this guy out," Jake said, nudging Tyler with his elbow. His voice was loud enough to carry across the open space. "What's he even doing here, just sitting like some statue or something?" Tyler squinted at the man, trying to make sense of his appearance. "Probably just some old vet trying to relive his glory days," he replied with a smirk. The comment earned a chuckle from Jake, and the two boys exchanged amused glances. Neither of them gave much thought to what they were saying, or how it might sound to others. For them, it was just another joke, another way to pass the time. But instead of moving on, curiosity, or perhaps boredom, drove them closer. They began circling the bench, their movements exaggerated and theatrical. Jake leaned down slightly, pretending to examine one of the patches on the man's jacket. "Wow, look at these," he said sarcastically. "Bet these are super important." The man didn't react immediately. His gaze remained fixed ahead, though his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Tyler noticed this and decided to push further. With a grin, he reached out and gave the man a light shove on the shoulder. "Hey hero, you hear us talking to you?" he teased. This time, the man turned his head slowly, meeting their eyes. There was no anger in his expression, only a deep sadness that seemed to weigh heavily on him. He gripped the edge of the bench firmly, steadying himself without saying a word. Jake and Tyler froze for a moment, unsure of what to do next. Then, emboldened by their shared bravado, they laughed nervously, pretending the whole thing was harmless fun. Their laughter echoed through the park, drawing glances from nearby people. A young mother pushing a stroller paused briefly, her brow furrowing in disapproval. An elderly couple sitting on a nearby bench exchanged worried looks but said nothing. No one intervened. The world around them continued as usual, leaving the man to endure the taunts alone. For Jake and Tyler, the situation felt thrilling in a strange way. They fed off each other's energy, their confidence growing with every passing second. They made fun of the man's clothes, his posture, and even the way he sat so quietly. Each insult was met with silence, which only encouraged them to keep going. It was as if they had found a new form of entertainment, one that allowed them to feel powerful and untouchable. Eventually, their antics grew tiresome and they decided to leave. Still laughing, they walked away from the bench, feeling invincible in their youthful ignorance. They didn't notice the slight tremor in the man's hands as he watched them go, nor did they see the way his shoulders sagged once they were out of sight. All they cared about was the thrill of the moment and the satisfaction of having entertained themselves. As they strolled down the street, their laughter gradually faded, replaced by a sense of emptiness. Neither of them spoke about what had happened, but a tiny seed of unease began to take root in their minds. Something about the man's silent endurance lingered in their thoughts, though neither could quite put it into words. They tried to shake it off, convincing themselves that it was just another meaningless prank. Little did they know, the consequences of their actions would catch up to them sooner than they expected. 20 minutes later, as they rounded a corner, A police car pulled up beside them, its lights flashing brightly against the gray afternoon sky. Out stepped Officer Daniels, a familiar face in the neighborhood, along with another officer who introduced himself as Detective Harris. The sight of the officers sent a jolt of panic through Jake and Tyler. Their earlier bravado vanished instantly, replaced by confusion and fear. "What's going on?" Tyler asked, his voice trembling slightly. Jake stood beside him, his fists clenched tightly as if bracing for the worst. Officer Daniels gestured for them to come closer, his expression unreadable. "We need you to come with us for questioning," he said firmly. The boys hesitated for a moment before reluctantly obeying, their hearts pounding wildly in their chests. Inside the police station, the atmosphere was tense and unwelcoming. Jake and Tyler were led to a small room where they were asked to sit. Detective Harris took a seat across from them, his piercing gaze making them feel even more uneasy. Officer Daniels stood nearby, arms crossed, watching silently. After a few moments of uncomfortable silence, Detective Harris finally spoke. "The man you harassed earlier today," he began, his voice low but commanding, "is Colonel Mark Reynolds." The name meant nothing to the boys at first, but the weight behind it became clear as the detective continued. "He's a decorated war hero who served our country for decades. And more importantly," he added, his tone hardening, "he's my father." The revelation hit Jake and Tyler like a punch to the gut. Their faces paled as the reality of their actions sank in. The man they had mocked and shoved wasn't just some random stranger. He was someone who had sacrificed everything for his country. Worse still, they now faced the wrath of his son, who sat across from them with barely concealed anger. For the first time, they realized the gravity of what they had done and the price they might have to pay for it. The silence in the room was deafening. Jake and Tyler sat frozen, their minds racing as they tried to process what Detective Harris had just said. The man they had taunted and shoved, the one they thought was just an ordinary old guy, was not only a war hero but also the father of the person interrogating them. The weight of their actions pressed down on them like a heavy blanket, making it hard to breathe. They glanced at each other nervously, unsure of what to say or do next. Detective Harris leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on the table. His eyes bore into the boys, sharp and unyielding. "Do you have any idea how lucky you are right now?" he asked, his voice low but filled with intensity. "My father could have pressed charges against you. Assault, harassment, public humiliation. Any of those would have been enough to make this situation much worse for you two." Jake swallowed hard, his throat dry. He opened his mouth to speak but couldn't find the words. Tyler, equally terrified, stared at the floor, avoiding eye contact with both officers. Officer Daniels, who had been standing quietly in the corner, finally stepped forward. His expression softened slightly, though his tone remained firm. "What happened today wasn't just about some random act of bullying," he said. "It's about respect, or the lack of it. You disrespected someone who has given more to this country than most people will ever understand." The mention of respect struck a chord with Jake and Tyler, though neither admitted it out loud. Deep down they knew they had crossed a line. Their behavior earlier that day hadn't been harmless fun. It had been cruel and thoughtless. But hearing it laid out so plainly made them feel even smaller than before. For the first time they began to see themselves through the eyes of others, and it wasn't a pretty picture. After what felt like an eternity, Detective Harris spoke again. "We're not going to charge you this time," he said, his voice still cold but tinged with reluctance. "But there are consequences for your actions. Your parents are on their way here, and we'll let them decide how to handle things from here. What I want from you right now is honesty. Tell me everything that happened." Relieved that they weren't being arrested, at least not yet, Jake and Tyler hesitated for a moment before recounting the events of the afternoon. They described how they had noticed Colonel Reynolds sitting alone on the bench, how they had mocked him and eventually pushed him. As they talked, their voices grew quieter, their confidence crumbling under the weight of their guilt. Detective Harris listened intently, his expression unreadable while Officer Daniels took notes. When they finished speaking, The room fell silent once again. Detective Harris leaned back in his chair, studying the boys carefully. "You know," he said after a pause, "my father doesn't talk much about his time in the military. He prefers to keep those memories to himself. But I can tell you this. He's seen things no one should ever have to see. He's lost friends, comrades, and parts of himself in service to this country. And despite all of that, he still chooses to live quietly, without seeking recognition or praise." Jake and Tyler exchanged uneasy glances. They hadn't considered any of that when they were teasing the man in the park. To them, he had just been another face in the crowd, someone they could use to entertain themselves for a few minutes. Now they realized how wrong they had been. Detective Harris continued, his voice softer, but no less impactful. "He didn't deserve what you did to him today. No one does. But especially not someone like him." At that moment, the door to the interrogation room opened, and both sets of parents rushed in. Jake's mom looked frantic, her hands clasped tightly together, while Tyler's dad appeared angry, his jaw clenched. When they saw their son sitting there, looking utterly defeated, their expressions shifted from worry to confusion, and then to anger. "What's going on?" Jake's mom demanded, her voice trembling. "Why are you questioning my son?" Officer Daniels stepped forward to explain the situation calmly. He recounted what had happened in the park, emphasizing the seriousness of the boy's actions. Both parents listened in stunned silence, their initial shock quickly giving way to embarrassment and frustration. "Is this true?" Tyler's dad asked, glaring at his son. "Did you really do this?" Tyler nodded slowly, unable to meet his father's gaze. Jake followed suit, his head hanging low. Seeing their sons admit to such behavior only deepened the parents' dismay. They turned to Detective Harris, apologizing profusely and promising that something like this would never happen again. Detective Harris accepted their apologies but made it clear that the matter wasn't over yet. "We expect accountability," he said firmly, "and part of that means facing the person you wronged. Tomorrow morning, you and your sons will accompany me to my father's house. They will apologize to him directly and sincerely. If he accepts their apology, we'll consider this resolved. But if he doesn't..." He let the sentence trail off, leaving the threat of further consequences hanging in the air. The ride home that evening was tense and uncomfortable. Neither set of parents said much, their disappointment evident in every glance and sigh. Jake and Tyler sat in the back seat, staring out the windows, consumed by guilt and fear. They knew they had messed up badly, and the thought of facing Colonel Reynolds again filled them with dread. What would he say to them? Would he forgive them, or would he refuse to even look at them? That night, sleep eluded both boys. Jake lay awake in bed, replaying the day's events in his mind. He kept thinking about the sadness in Colonel Reynolds' eyes when they had taunted him. It wasn't anger or frustration, it was hurt. That realization gnawed at Jake, making it impossible to shake off the guilt. Across town, Tyler was having similar thoughts. He couldn't stop imagining the man's stooped figure and quiet dignity. The image haunted him, reminding him of how cruel he had been. The next morning arrived too quickly. Both families met outside Colonel Reynolds' modest house, their nerves frayed and their hearts heavy. Detective Harris led them to the backyard, where the colonel was tending to a small garden. He wore the same faded jacket from the day before, its patches catching the sunlight. When he saw the group approaching, he straightened up slowly, wiping, his hands on a cloth. "Dad," Detective Harris began, his voice gentle, "these are the boys I told you about. They've come to apologize." Colonel Reynolds nodded silently, gesturing for everyone to sit. He offered them chairs and lemonade, his hospitality surprising given the circumstances. Jake and Tyler hesitated, unsure of how to respond. Finally, they sat down, their legs shaking beneath the table. Colonel Reynolds studied them for a moment before speaking. His voice was calm and measured, carrying none of the bitterness they expected. "I don't hold grudges easily," he said. "But I think it's important for you to understand why your actions yesterday were wrong, so I'm going to share a little bit about my life. Not to shame you, but to help you learn. With that, he began telling stories of his time in the military. He spoke of the camaraderie among soldiers, the sacrifices they made, and the losses they endured. He described moments of triumph and heartbreak, painting a vivid picture of what it meant to serve. Throughout his narrative, his tone remained steady, his words chosen carefully to convey meaning without malice. As he spoke, Jake and Tyler found themselves captivated. They had never heard anything like this before, and the raw honesty of his stories left a lasting impression. By the end of his account, tears welled up in their eyes. They realized they hadn't just hurt a stranger. They had disrespected a man who had dedicated his life to protecting others. Overwhelmed by emotion, they apologized sincerely, promising to change their ways. Colonel Reynolds accepted their apology graciously, offering them words of encouragement. "Everyone makes mistakes," he said. "What matters is what you do afterward. Learn from this and don't let it define you." With those parting words, he dismissed them, leaving them to reflect on the lessons they had learned. The days that followed the visit to Colonel Reynolds' house were unlike any Jake and Tyler had experienced before. The weight of their apology and the Colonel's forgiveness stayed with them, lingering in their thoughts long after they left his backyard. For the first time in their lives, they felt a deep sense of accountability for their actions. It wasn't just guilt. It was an understanding that their choices had consequences, not only for themselves, but for others as well. School things didn't immediately change. Their classmates noticed something was off, though. Jake, who had always been quick with a joke or sarcastic remark, seemed quieter than usual. Tyler, known for his loud energy and playful teasing, now hesitated before jumping into conversations. When friends asked what was wrong, both boys shrugged it off, unwilling to share the full story. They weren't ready to admit how much the incident had shaken them, or how ashamed they felt about their behavior. But at home, the pressure mounted. Their parents weren't letting them off the hook easily. Jake's mom sat him down one evening. After dinner, her expression serious. "You need to think about what you did," she said firmly. "This isn't just about saying sorry and moving on. You hurt someone, Jake, and if you don't learn from this, it's going to happen again." Tyler faced similar lectures from his dad, who reminded him constantly about respect and responsibility. "You can't treat people like objects just because they're different from you," his father told him sternly. "That man could have been anyone, a neighbor, a teacher, a family member. Would you have done the same thing? Would you want someone treating your grandfather like that?" These conversations gnawed at Jake and Tyler, forcing them to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves. They realized that their actions in the park hadn't come out of nowhere. They were part of a pattern. Both boys admitted, at least, to themselves, that they often teased or mocked people without thinking twice about how it might affect them. Whether it was making fun of a classmate for tripping in the hallway or laughing at someone's clothes, they had built habits of cruelty without realizing the harm they caused. One afternoon, as they walked home together, Jake finally broke the silence between them. "Do you think we'll ever stop feeling bad about this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Tyler kicked a pebble on the sidewalk, watching it skitter ahead of them. "I don't know," he muttered. "Maybe. We deserve to feel bad for a while." They continued walking in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. As they passed by the park where everything had happened, Jake stopped suddenly. He stared at the bench where Colonel Reynolds had been sitting that day, remembering the sadness in the man's eyes. "We should do something," he said abruptly, "something real. Just saying sorry isn't enough." Tyler frowned, unsure of what Jake meant. "Like what?" he asked skeptically. Jake hesitated, searching for the right words. "I don't know yet," he admitted. "But there has to be a way to make up for what we did. Not just to him, but to everyone we've messed with before." The idea took root in their minds, growing stronger with each passing day. By the end of the week, they decided to act on it. After some research online, they discovered a local organization called Veterans, Helping Veterans. The group provided support and resources to former service members, helping them adjust to civilian life and find employment. Jake and Tyler knew almost nothing about veterans beyond what Colonel Reynolds had shared, but they figured volunteering their time would be a good start. Their parents were surprised and pleased when they brought up the idea. "It's about time you two started thinking about others instead of yourselves," Jake's mom said approvingly. Tyler's dad nodded in agreement. "If you're serious about changing, then prove it. Show up, work hard, and mean it." On their first day, at the organization's headquarters, Jake and Tyler felt completely out of place. The building was small but bustling with activity. Volunteers sorted donations, answered phones, and helped veterans fill out paperwork. A coordinator named Sandra greeted them warmly, explaining their tasks for the day. "You'll mostly be organizing supplies and assisting wherever needed," she said. "It's not glamorous, but every little bit helps." As they worked, Jake and Vic overheard snippets of conversations around them. One veteran talked about struggling to find affordable housing after returning from deployment. Another mentioned the difficulty of reconnecting with family after years away. These stories struck a chord with the boys, reminding them of Colonel Reynolds' words about sacrifice and loss. They realized that many of these men and women carried burdens far heavier than anything they had ever faced. By the end of the day, their muscles ached from lifting boxes, and their hands were covered in dust. But despite the physical exhaustion, they felt a strange sense of satisfaction. For the first time in a long time, they had done something meaningful, not for themselves, but for others. As they left the building, Sandra thanked them for their effort. "Come back whenever you can," she said with a smile. "We always need more help." Jake and Tyler returned to the organization regularly over the next few weeks. Each visit deepened their understanding of the challenges faced by veterans. They learned how to listen without judgment, how to offer assistance without making assumptions, and how to see people as individuals rather than stereotypes. Slowly but surely, they began to shed the reckless attitudes that had defined them before. Their transformation didn't go unnoticed. At school, teachers remarked on their improved behavior. Classmates noticed that Jake and Tyler were kinder, more patient, and less likely to join in on jokes at someone else's expense. Even their parents saw changes at home. Jake started helping around the house without being asked, while Tyler became more thoughtful in his interactions with family members. Meanwhile, news of the incident spread through the community. Some people criticized the boys for their initial actions, calling them disrespectful and entitled. Others praised Colonel Reynolds for his grace and willingness to forgive. The story sparked discussions about empathy, accountability, and the importance of respecting those who serve. Local newspapers even wrote articles about the situation, highlighting Jake and Tyler's efforts to make amends. Colonel Reynolds himself remained humble throughout it all. When reporters approached him for interviews, he politely declined, preferring to stay out of the spotlight. Instead, he focused on his garden and occasional visits to the Veterans Organization, where he sometimes crossed paths with Jake and Tyler. Though he never said much during these encounters, his presence alone served as a reminder of the impact one person's kindness could have. Over time, Jake and Tyler developed a newfound appreciation for the sacrifices made by people like Colonel Reynolds. They began attending events hosted by the organization, listening to guest speakers share their experiences, and learning about the history of military service. These activities broadened their perspectives, teaching them lessons that went far beyond what they had learned in school. Their journey wasn't easy, and there were moments when old habits threatened to resurface. But whenever doubt crept in, they remembered the sadness in Colonel Reynolds' eyes and the stories they had heard from other veterans. Those memories kept them grounded, pushing them to continue growing and improving. Eventually, Jake and Tyler found themselves standing in front of a group of students at their school, sharing their story during an assembly. They spoke candidly about their mistakes, the lessons they had learned, and the steps they had taken to make amends. Their honesty resonated with the audience, earning applause and admiration. For once, they weren't seeking attention for selfish reasons. They were using their experience to inspire others. As they stepped off the stage, Jake turned to Tyler with a small smile. "You know," he said softly, "I think we're finally doing something right." Tyler nodded, a hint of pride in his eyes. "Yeah," he replied. "And maybe, just maybe, we won't mess it up this time." Jake and Tyler's journey of redemption continued to unfold in ways they never could have imagined. Their decision to volunteer at the Veterans Organization opened doors to experiences that changed their outlook on life. Each visit brought new lessons, new connections, and a deeper understanding of the sacrifices made by those who served. It wasn't always easy. There were days when the work felt overwhelming or when they struggled to grasp the gravity of the stories they heard. But they kept showing up. They knew it was the least they could do. One Saturday morning, as they sorted through donated clothes and supplies, Jake noticed a man sitting alone in the corner of the room. He looked younger than most of the veterans they had met, probably in his early 30s with short-cropped hair and a tired expression. The man seemed lost in thought, staring blankly at the floor. Something about him caught Jake's attention, and he nudged Tyler. "Who's that?" he whispered, nodding toward the man. Tyler shrugged. "I don't know, maybe we should ask Sandra." They approached the coordinator, who smiled when she saw them. "That's Marcus," she explained quietly. "He just got back from overseas a few months ago. He's having a tough time adjusting, so we're trying to help him settle in." Jake and Tyler exchanged glances. Neither of them had ever spoken directly to a veteran before, aside from Colonel Reynolds. They weren't sure what to say or how to act, but something inside them urged them to try. After a moment of hesitation, Jake walked over to Marcus and sat down beside him. Tyler followed, feeling nervous but determined. "Hey," Jake said awkwardly. "I'm Jake, and this is Tyler. We're volunteers here. How are you doing?" Marcus glanced up, surprised to see them. For a moment, he didn't respond, as if unsure whether to trust them. Then, with a faint smile, he replied, "I'm okay, I guess. Just trying to figure things out." The conversation started slowly, with Jake and Tyler asking simple questions about Marcus's background and interests. At first, Marcus was reserved, answering in short sentences and avoiding eye contact. But as the minutes passed, he began opening up. He talked about his time in the military, the friendships he had formed, and the challenges of returning to civilian life. His voice carried a mix of pride and pain, revealing the complexity of his emotions. Listening to Marcus, Jake, and Tyler realized how little they truly understood about the lives of veterans. They had assumed that coming home meant everything would go back to normal, but Marcus explained that it wasn't that simple. Many veterans struggled with finding jobs, reconnecting with loved ones, or dealing with memories of their service. Some, like Marcus, felt isolated and disconnected from the world around them. By the end of their conversation, Marcus thanked them for taking the time to talk. "Most people don't bother asking," he admitted. "They just assume we're fine because we're back. But it's not that easy." Jake and Tyler left the meeting feeling humbled. They hadn't done anything extraordinary. They had simply listened, but it had clearly meant something to Marcus. From that day on, they made an effort to connect with other veterans at the organization, offering their support in whatever way they could. Whether it was helping someone fill out paperwork, carrying boxes, or just sharing a cup of coffee, they threw themselves into the work wholeheartedly. Their dedication didn't go unnoticed. Sandra, the coordinator, began assigning them more responsibilities, trusting them to handle tasks independently. She even invited them to attend a special event hosted by the organization, a tribute to local veterans who had made significant contributions to the community. Jake and Tyler eagerly accepted, excited to be part of something bigger than themselves. The event took place in a large hall decorated with flags and photos of soldiers. Families, friends, and supporters gathered to honor the veterans whose stories were shared through speeches and video presentations. As Jake and Tyler listened, they were struck by the diversity of experiences represented. Some veterans had served in combat zones, while others had worked behind the scenes, providing medical care or logistical support. Each story was unique, yet all shared a common thread of courage and sacrifice. During the ceremony, Colonel Reynolds was called to the stage. Jake and Tyler watched in awe as he stood up, his posture straighter and prouder than they had ever seen it. He spoke briefly, thanking the audience for their recognition and expressing gratitude for the camaraderie among veterans. His words were humble and heartfelt, earning a standing ovation from the crowd. After the event, Jake and Tyler approached Colonel Reynolds, eager to thank him for inspiring them to get involved. To their surprise, he greeted them warmly, shaking their hands firmly. "I've heard good things about your work," he said with a smile. "You're making a real difference." The compliment filled them with pride, but also reinforced their commitment to keep going. They knew they still had a long way to go, but they were determined to honor the colonel's example by continuing to give back. As weeks turned into months, Jake and Tyler became fixtures at the Veterans Organization. Their reputation grew within the community, and soon they were asked to speak at schools and community events about their journey. At first, they were hesitant, worried about saying the wrong thing or embarrassing themselves. But with practice, they grew more confident, learning how to articulate their experiences in a way that resonated with others. Their talks focused not only on their mistakes, but also on the importance of empathy and accountability. They encouraged listeners to think critically about their own actions and consider how they treated people who were different from them. "We all mess up sometimes," Jake would say during these presentations. "But what matters is what you do after. Do you ignore it and move on? Or do you take responsibility and try to make things right?" Tyler often added, "It's not just about apologizing, it's about changing the way you think and act. That's the hardest part, but it's also the most important." Their message inspired many, especially young people who related to their struggles. Teachers reported seeing positive changes in student behavior, attributing it to Jake and Tyler's influence. Even adults praised the boys for their maturity and willingness to grow from their mistakes. Despite their growing confidence, Jake and Tyler never forgot where they had started. They continued volunteering regularly, knowing that their work was far from finished. They also stayed in touch with Colonel Reynolds, visiting him occasionally to update him on their progress. During one such visit, the colonel shared some advice that stuck with them. "Growth isn't something that happens overnight," he told them. "It's a lifelong process. Keep learning, keep listening, and don't be afraid to fail along the way. What matters is that you keep moving forward." Those words became a guiding principle for Jake and Tyler as they navigated their new roles in the community. They embraced every opportunity to learn, whether it was attending workshops on mental health awareness or participating in outreach programs for underserved populations. Each experience deepened their understanding of the world and their place in it. Over time, their efforts began to inspire others to take action as well. Friends and classmates joined them in volunteering, creating a ripple effect of kindness and compassion. Together they organized fundraisers, collected donations, and raised awareness about issues affecting veterans and other marginalized groups. What had started as two boys' attempt to make amends evolved into a movement that touched countless lives. Through it all, Jake and Tyler remained grounded, remembering the lessons they had learned from Colonel Reynolds and the veterans they had met. They knew they weren't perfect and likely never would be, but they were committed to being better. And in doing so, they discovered a sense of purpose they had never imagined possible. As the months passed, Jake and Tyler's involvement with the Veterans Organization became a cornerstone of their lives. It wasn't just about volunteering anymore. It was about building relationships, learning from others, and finding ways to contribute meaningfully. Each day brought new challenges and opportunities, and they embraced them with a determination that surprised even themselves. The boys who had once mocked and teased without thought were now known for their kindness and willingness to help. One evening, as they helped set up chairs for a community event at the organization's headquarters, Sandra approached them with an idea. "We're planning a special project next month," she said. "It's called Stories of Service, and we want to collect personal accounts from veterans to share with the public. We think it'll help people understand what life is like for those who've served. Would you two be interested in helping out?" Jake and Tyler exchanged excited glances. They loved the idea of giving veterans a platform to share their experiences. "Of course," Jake replied enthusiastically. "What do we need to do?" Sandra smiled. "We'll need help interviewing veterans, recording their stories, and putting everything together. It won't be easy, but I know you two can handle it." The project quickly became their main focus. They spent hours preparing questions, practicing interview techniques, and learning how to use recording equipment. At first, they were nervous about speaking with veterans. They didn't want to say the wrong thing or make anyone uncomfortable. But Sandra reassured them. Just be genuine, she advised. Listen more than you talk and let them guide the conversation. Their first interview was with Marcus, the young veteran they had met months earlier. He agreed to participate, though he seemed hesitant at first. Sitting across from Jake and Tyler in a quiet corner of the building, he took a deep breath before beginning. His story was raw and emotional, filled with moments of triumph and heartbreak. He talked about losing friends in combat, struggling with anxiety after returning home, and finding solace in reconnecting with fellow veterans. By the end of the session, tears glistened in his eyes, and in theirs too. That was amazing, Tyler said softly as they packed up the equipment. I had no idea how much he'd been through. Me neither, Jake agreed. This is going to mean so much to people when they hear it. Over the next few weeks, they interviewed dozens of veterans, each with their own unique perspective. Some shared humorous anecdotes about their time in the military, while others recounted harrowing tales of survival. Every story added depth and richness to the project, painting a vivid picture of sacrifice and resilience. As they worked, Jake and Tyler felt a profound sense of gratitude, not only for the veterans' service but also for the trust they placed in them by sharing their experiences. When the Stories of Service exhibit finally launched, it drew a large crowd. The event featured audio recordings, photographs, and written excerpts from the interviews, creating an immersive experience for attendees. Visitors moved through the displays quietly, many wiping away tears as they listened to the veterans' voices. At the center of the room stood Jake and Tyler, answering questions and explaining the project's purpose. This is incredible, one woman said, her voice trembling with emotion. My dad served in Vietnam, but he never talks about it. Hearing these stories makes me feel closer to him somehow. Another man nodded in agreement. I didn't realize how much veterans go through when they come home. This changes everything for me. The success of the exhibit reinforced Jake and Tyler's belief in the power of storytelling. They saw firsthand how sharing personal experiences could bridge gaps, foster understanding, and inspire action. For the first time, they truly understood the impact they could have when they put their hearts into something. But their journey wasn't without its challenges. There were days when the weight of the stories they heard felt overwhelming. After particularly emotional interviews, Jake and Tyler would sit together in silence, processing what they had learned. They leaned on each other for support, knowing they weren't alone in their struggles. Sometimes Colonel Reynolds would join them, offering words of wisdom and reminding them to take care of themselves. You're doing important work, he told them one afternoon, but don't forget to rest. Even the strongest soldiers need time to recover. His advice stayed with them, helping them find balance as they continued their efforts. They began incorporating self-care into their routines, whether it was taking long walks, journaling their thoughts, or simply spending time with family and friends. These small acts of kindness toward themselves made it easier to keep moving forward. As word of their work spread, Jake and Tyler received invitations to speak at larger events, including conferences and town hall meetings. At first, the scale of these gatherings intimidated them, but they quickly adapted, drawing strength from the connections they had built along the way. Their presentations combined personal reflections with insights gained from working with veterans, creating a powerful narrative that resonated with audiences of all ages. One memorable speech took place at a regional education summit, where educators and students gathered to discuss ways to promote empathy and inclusivity in schools. Standing on stage, Jake addressed the crowd with confidence. When we started this journey, we didn't know where it would lead, he began. All we knew was that we wanted to make things right. What we've learned since then is that change starts with listening. If you really listen to someone, if you hear their story, you'll see them differently. You'll understand why respect matters. Tyler picked up where Jake left off, emphasizing the importance of action. It's not enough to say you care, he said. You have to show it. Whether it's volunteering, standing up for someone who's being treated unfairly, or just being there for a friend, every little bit counts. Their message struck a chord with the audience, earning a standing ovation and sparking lively discussions during the Q&A session that followed. Teachers approached them afterward, asking for advice on how to implement similar initiatives in their classrooms. Students thanked them for being honest and relatable, saying they felt inspired to make a difference in their own communities. Back home, Jake and Tyler's efforts continued to gain recognition. Local newspapers featured articles about their transformation, highlighting their dedication to helping veterans and promoting awareness. Social media posts praising their work went viral, reaching people far beyond their small town. Strangers sent messages of encouragement, sharing how their story had motivated them to volunteer or reach out to someone in need. Despite the attention, Jake and Tyler remained humble. They knew their journey wasn't about fame or accolades. It was about making amends and creating positive change. They still faced moments of doubt, wondering if they were doing enough or if they deserved the praise they received. But whenever those thoughts crept in, they reminded themselves of Colonel Reynolds' words. Growth isn't something that happens overnight. Keep moving forward. Their bond with Colonel Reynolds grew stronger over time. He became a mentor to them, offering guidance not only in their volunteer work but also in their personal lives. When Jake struggled with a difficult decision about his future, the colonel sat with him for hours, sharing stories of his own career choices and the lessons he had learned along the way. When Tyler faced conflict with a close friend, the colonel listened patiently, helping him see the situation from a different perspective. He's like a second father to us, Jake confided to Tyler one evening as they walked home from the organization. I don't know what we'd do without him. Tyler nodded. Yeah, he's taught us so much, not just about veterans but about life. Through it all, Jake and Tyler never lost sight of why they had started this journey. They carried the memory of that fateful day in the park with them, using it as a reminder of how far they had come and how much further they still had to go. Their mistakes had shaped them, teaching them the value of accountability, empathy, and perseverance. And while they knew they would continue to face challenges, they were ready to meet them head-on, armed with the lessons they had learned and the support of those who believed in them. As they looked ahead to the future, Jake and Tyler felt a sense of hope. They didn't know exactly where their path would lead, but they were determined to keep walking it, one step at a time. The months rolled on, and Jake and Tyler's efforts began to leave a lasting mark not only on their community, but also on themselves. What had started as an attempt to make amends for a single mistake had blossomed into something far greater. Commitment to helping others and fostering understanding. Their journey was no longer just about redemption. It was about creating a legacy of kindness and respect that could inspire future generations. One crisp autumn morning, as they helped organize supplies at the Veterans Organization, Sandra approached them with news. You two have done such incredible work, she said warmly. We've been asked to present your Stories of Service project at a national conference next month. It's a huge opportunity to share what you've accomplished and encourage other communities to start similar initiatives. Jake and Tyler exchanged stunned glances. A national conference? The idea felt overwhelming yet exhilarating. They had never imagined their small-town project would reach such heights. Are you sure we're ready for this? Tyler asked nervously. Sandra smiled reassuringly. You've already proven yourselves. Trust me, you'll do great. With her encouragement, they agreed to take on the challenge. Over the next few weeks, they worked tirelessly to prepare for the presentation. They reviewed every interview, polished their speech, and practiced answering potential questions. Colonel Reynolds even joined them for several rehearsals, offering feedback and reminding them to stay grounded. Remember why you started this, he told them. Let that guide you. When the day of the conference arrived, Jake and Tyler stood backstage, their hearts pounding. The auditorium was packed with people from across the country, educators, activists, veterans, and policymakers, all gathered to discuss ways to support those who served. As they waited for their turn to speak, Jake turned to Tyler. No matter what happens out there, we've already made a difference, he said quietly. Tyler nodded, feeling a surge of calm wash over him. When their names were called, they walked onto the stage, greeted by polite applause. Standing under the bright lights, Jake took a deep breath and began. "A year ago, we were just two teenagers trying to figure things out," he said, his voice steady. "We made a big mistake. One that hurt someone we didn't even know. But that mistake taught us something important. Our actions matter. And sometimes, making things right means more than just saying sorry." Tyler stepped in next, sharing how meeting Colonel Reynolds and working with veterans had changed their perspective. He spoke passionately about the power of listening, the importance of empathy, and the impact of giving back. "This project isn't about us," he emphasized. "It's about the stories we've been honored to hear and the lessons they've taught us. We hope it inspires others to listen, learn, and act." As they wrapped up their presentation, the audience erupted into applause. People lined up afterward to congratulate them, ask questions, and express interest in starting similar projects in their own communities. For Jake and Tyler, it was a surreal moment, a reminder of how far they had come since that fateful day in the park. Back home, the ripple effects of their work continued to grow. Inspired by their story, local schools launched programs focused on teaching students about empathy and civic responsibility. Community groups organized events to honor veterans, raising funds and awareness for causes close to their hearts. Even businesses got involved, offering job training and employment opportunities to returning service members. Jake and Tyler remained at the center of it all, serving as ambassadors for the movement they had unintentionally sparked. They traveled to neighboring towns, sharing their experiences and encouraging others to take action. Their message resonated deeply, particularly with young people who saw themselves in the boys' journey. "If they can change, so can I," one teenager remarked during a school visit. "It gives me hope." Despite their growing influence, Jake and TX Clear kept their focus on the veterans they had come to admire. They spent countless hours volunteering, ensuring that their efforts stayed rooted in gratitude and service. They also maintained their connection with Colonel Reynolds, visiting him regularly to update him on their progress. During one such visit, the colonel shared a thought that stayed with them. "You've done well," he said. "But remember, true leadership isn't about standing out, it's about lifting others up." Those words guided them as they navigated their newfound roles. They made it a point to highlight the contributions of others, whether it was thanking volunteers, celebrating veterans' achievements, or amplifying voices that might otherwise go unheard. Their humility endeared them to everyone they met, earning them even more respect and admiration. As time went on, Jake and Tyler began thinking about the future. High school graduation loomed ahead, and with it came decisions about college and careers. Both boys knew they wanted to continue their work in some capacity, though they weren't sure exactly how. Jake considered studying social work, hoping to help marginalized communities. Tyler leaned toward journalism, eager to tell stories that inspired change. Whatever paths they chose, they vowed to stay connected to the values they had embraced. "We've learned that life is about more than ourselves," Jake said one evening as they sat together in the park where it had all begun. "It's about the people around us, the ones we meet, the ones we help, and the ones who teach us along the way." Tyler nodded, looking around at the familiar trees and benches. "Yeah, and no matter where we go, we'll always carry this with us." Their journey wasn't perfect. They still stumbled occasionally, facing moments of doubt or frustration, but they faced each challenge with resilience. They had learned that growth was a lifelong process, one that required patience, courage, and a willingness to keep moving forward. Years later, when people looked back on Jake and Tyler's story, they saw more than just two teenagers who had made a mistake. They saw a testament to the power of accountability, empathy, and transformation. The boys who had once mocked a stranger in a park had grown into men who dedicated their lives to serving others. Their actions reminded everyone that no matter how far someone strays, there is always a chance to turn things around, and that even the smallest acts of kindness can create waves of change. And so, Jake and Tyler's story became a beacon of hope, a reminder that redemption is possible, that growth is achievable, and that every person has the potential to make a difference. Through their efforts, they proved that mistakes don't define us. It's what we do afterward that truly matters.